So what am I saying? Well, let's go over this again so that it's as clear as possible. If you go to the traditions of the East, they will all have myths about the Creator. They will have given the Creator certain names. There is a Creator. There is an actual creation. I'm not going to go into that part of things. I got a new set of themes I'm going to do about called Proof of God, where I try to provide some information to the new atheists about these subjects, which are very complicated. Here I'm just talking about Eastern traditions and Western development since the age of science began about spirituality. So that's the context in which what I'm talking to you about now in terms of wisdom, okay? And it's helpful to have this picture, this idea that what happened in Palestine 2,000 years ago was in fact the Creator becoming human and going through the gate of death because of His love for us. All right? And you can get all kinds of theological things about what that means out of Christian theology, and I'm just saying it doesn't mean much more than that in a certain sense. But the other aspect of that is to recognize that this is the same being that's traditionally talked about all over the world. There's a Creator. Now the Creator is complicated. You know, when you get into the structure of all that and how that all works, you can get into really complicated things. And to some extent, when the Christians talk about Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or when they talk about Brahman, Vishnu, and Shiva, and you know, all these different places where people talk about this, that, and the other thing, you know, and in Christianity you're not only going to have Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, you're going to have Mother, Daughter, and Holy Soul in the future when we get into understanding the return of the Divine Feminine, which I talk about on my material on the redemption of Eros, in the Misery, Love, Company section. Okay, but over here we're talking about East versus West and traditional and scientific wisdom. Okay, and we're talking about traditional wisdom in a certain sense. There's an idea of the Creator, and the Creator came to Earth and became. He participated in what we participate in, and there are lots of things that flow from this. You'll find this discussed in my writing and also by other people, but there's lots of consequences to this. One of the things perhaps to appreciate is that the creation is not finished. Okay? Not finished. It's ongoing. And when we get into certain books that I'm going to do in this section on becoming a real wizard, that is, the pursuit of wisdom can be helped by having a library, you know. I'll get into some of that, but some of the ongoing elements of the creation in terms of things that natural science could observe if it sort of lifted up its head a little bit and stopped being too much involved in the particular. In any event, creation is ongoing, and that's one of the reasons we're talking about original participation, the onlooker separation, and final participation. And as part of the ongoing nature of the creation, the Creator instituted a transformation of the ego. That is, the ego as it was in the past and remembered by traditional Eastern wisdoms is not the ego of today. The ego of today is evolved from that state. So when traditional wisdom says get rid of the old ego or abandon the ego-ness and all the rest of those things, it's basically referring to an idea it has from the past about what the ego is. And if these traditional wisdoms were able to penetrate more deeply, and there are some Eastern teachers that are capable of doing this, if they were able to penetrate more deeply into the understanding of the ego itself, they would come to recognize this transformative process. Rudolf Steiner gets very complicated about it. He talks about 3 egos and their differences, and you can get into this in his stuff. And I'm not, I'm saying, remember I said it's all very complicated. I'm not going to go there. I just want to suggest the idea that with this sequence of original participation, the onlooker separation, and final participation, accompanying that is a long-term process in which the ego itself evolves. It's becoming something different. And the ego we have today is not the same as the ego that was beheld and thought about in traditional Eastern wisdoms. And most of these traditional Eastern wisdoms, to the extent they're taught in the West and try to tell us about what the ego is, they are simply mistaken. The traditional element has overwhelmed the ability and the capacity to see into the present now state of the ego. But this transformed ego is going to be able to engage in what Barfield calls final participation. And of course, you want to read the whole book, Saving the Appearance is a Study in Idolatry, because it's it's complicated. I just love that. But people who want their spirituality to be simple, well, you get what you paid for, folks. You want it to be simple, you want it to be spirituality, you wanted to get it from McDonald's, then that's what you'll get. And maybe that's what you need. Maybe you don't want complicated. Maybe you want it to be simple. And that's what you'll get out of this incarnation. You'll get that kind of spirituality. You'll only be able to do ABC. You'll be stuck in the kindergarten of spirituality. All right? And as we go forward in these, and I start talking about the scientific as opposed to the traditional. Anyway, so final participation is an act of the ego by which it begins to reintegrate itself with the spiritual. That's what Barfield is talking about. So we have original participation, which is a certain state of consciousness, and it's a long historical process in which the ego was kind of pushed into materiality, you might say, and in the process of encountering materiality and living in the material physical world, certain transformations are made possible. And of course, this is what the Creator has been up to with continuous creation, is urging along these transformations, because the ultimate result is to make something of the ego that it couldn't be before. And as it becomes this thing that it couldn't be before, as it enters into the stage where it can go into final participation, and some people have clues of this. They talk about us being co-creators. That's a sort of simplistic intuition, And as we go on in this particular set of talks, we're going to get more into the concrete nature of that. And again, it's going to result in some understanding some differences between East and West. But in final participation, we become co-creators. We begin to participate in the structure of the world and in the creation of what goes on, including ourselves. This living, thinking, and action, some people come to it instinctively, but most people are going to give birth to it themselves. You bring it out. It's not a given. More later.